Hello and welcome to another video. I first want to apologize if the sound isn't great, but I'm in a hotel room and I don't have my microphone, so my computer will have to do. In this video, I'm showing how you can take plain background stamps and give them a completely different look by adding dimension. This is something you can do with any background stamps, and I have a couple examples for you. We're going to start with this one here, where I created kind of a sunshine look using a really cool new background from Simon Says Stamp. This stamp is circular and radiates from the center, which I thought would be perfect for a sun. I have a piece of white cardstock here. I used my anti-static powder tool, and I'm inking up my stamp with VersaMark Ink. Then I'll lay my paper onto it and press firmly to make sure that I transfer all the ink onto my cardstock. I really like that this is a cling stamp and it clings to my Tim Holtz media mat, which is the glass surface I'm working on. It keeps it still, makes it easy to stamp. Next, I'm adding white embossing powder, and I'll heat set this. You won't really see the image because it's white on white, but you'll see it later when we apply ink. Okay, while I get my heat gun good and hot, it's warming up there, I've grabbed a Hero Arts 12-point star die and also a couple large circle dies. Now I'm going to use these to do the die cutting of my background. Now that my heat gun is hot, I'll heat set that background and we can do the die cutting. Now to make sure that I space my dies perfectly, I'm going to tape them together. So here I have the die side down, the cutting edge down, and the back of the dies are facing up. And I'm adding some purple tape to them to connect them. So you can see the three dies are connected here. So I can die cut many times and all the shapes will be the same size. I'm first going to lay this onto my stamped background, that embossed background that we just created, lining it up with the pattern that we have. Next, I'll run this through my die cut machine. And when I take it out of my die cut machine, I'm going to keep the pieces kind of laying together so that I know how they go on the card. I'm carefully removing the pieces, but making sure that the dies stay connected so I can cut them in the same way in a moment. I also decided to cut an additional circle from the center of the sun. This was an afterthought, so I'm just doing it here. Now it's time to color all of these pieces. I'm using Distress ink and an ink blending tool, but you could use Distress Oxide inks or any other kind of dye or pigment ink that you may have. You could even use watercolor on this if you wanted to. I'm kind of going for softer looks, using Squeezed Lemonade, Wild Honey, a little bit of Broken China. I even pulled in an Altenew light blue ink. So whatever inks you have would work great. And you'll notice I tore my sun piece there, but that's okay. When we assemble the card, nobody will ever know. So what's happening here is the white embossed image is resisting the ink, so you can see the white stamped pattern through these colors. Now I'm just doing the colors onto this top layer. After I've applied the colors to these top layer pieces, I'm going to die cut additional pieces to go behind those so we can have some dimension. So I still have my dies connected and I'm running them through my die cut machine with white cardstock, and I'm die cutting 4 times. So I have 4 layers of white cardstock to put behind some of the pieces. I have another piece of white cardstock here cut to the same size. I'm gluing the top and the bottom down first, since I don't want any dimension behind those. But for this ring here, I am adhering 4 white circle die cuts behind it. That will make this piece stand up nicely. Now you could use foam tape, but by adding die cut pieces of the same size behind it, you get a really nice finished look from the side. It really is nice and sturdy. It'll hold up in the mail. And it just looks a lot better than if you were to use foam tape behind it. So I glued 4 behind my inked colored ring, and I'm gluing that right into the center. It just pops in like a puzzle. So all of these pieces go in like a puzzle since they were die cut together. Now for the next piece, I didn't want any dimension behind this, and I'm just gluing it right down into the center. It'll pop in place. I find liquid adhesive like this Gina K-Connect to be the best adhesive for this because you can kind of move it when you put it down and make sure it's positioned just right. Now behind this sun piece, I am stacking 4 of the white die cuts so that this piece will stand up. So I have some of it flat and some of it standing up. Here we can add that piece that I accidentally tore, but again, no one will ever know once it's glued down. Now behind this stacked piece, I'm putting some liquid adhesive and popping it right into place on our card. And all these pieces fit together like a puzzle. And our patterned piece, our patterned stamping, will continue across all of those pieces. It's really cool looking. Now for the center, I'm stacking 3 white die cut circles and then our pattern one on that. So you can see the continuous pattern from our heat embossed stamped image. Such a fun way to add dimension to your background and also lots of color. So now I'm adding this onto a white note card, and I'm using a lot of adhesive on the back of that because this is kind of a heavier card panel, so I want to make sure it stays put. Now for the sentiment, I'm using this You Are My Sunshine die cut. At first I thought I was going to use the whole message, but I decided just to use the word sunshine. I stacked 3 white die cut sunshines together, then a black one on top so it would stand out. Underneath it, I have an Is Coming sentiment that I stamped from that stamp set that you see there to the left. I like that you can team up these messages to get different greetings, like Happy Summer, Sending Sunshine, Sunshine is Coming Your Way. I just decided to go with Sunshine is Coming. I put liquid adhesive on the back of that foam tape just so I could move it around and make sure I have it positioned straight before I leave it to dry, and it still has that dimension behind it. It's helpful to use a T-ruler to make sure you get everything straight. Now I didn't add anything else to this card because I felt like all that dimension from those stacked die cuts gave enough interest to it, and you can see the white from the side from all those stacked die cuts. And also you can see that stamped pattern stretches across all the pieces so it's nice and continuous. Okay, my next example also uses another background stamp, but this time I'm not using dies to create all of those dimensional pieces. Instead, I'm just going to cut them by hand. I thought this was a beautiful new background from Simon Says Stamp and perfect for this technique. I'm again inking up my stamp with VersaMark Ink. I used my anti-static powder tool, and now I'm stamping that onto my white cardstock, and I'll add white embossing powder. You could use any color embossing powder, but white is the most striking against the color that we'll add. After I've heat set this, I'm going to cut along the pattern. It's hard to see the pattern that's white embossed on the video, but I can see it in real life. The background is a bunch of diagonal squares, or diamonds, and I'm just cutting between all of those diamonds. I'm using my Holtz Trimmer. This is my favorite trimmer right now. It cuts beautifully, and I can easily see where I'm going to cut each time. So I'm cutting these pieces apart. Again, on the video it looks like it's difficult, but it is very easy because I can see the lines in the background stamp, and I'm just following the lines. I have another piece of white cardstock that's cut to the same size that I'm just using to hold my pieces so I don't get them mixed up. So I'm just laying them on that. Now I'm going to take each strip and cut in the other direction, and I'll end up with a bunch of squares. Again, just following the pattern of the stamping. So think about different background stamps that you have that you might be able to cut along the pattern, maybe some stripes from a plaid, or you could even use a die cut to follow the pattern on the stamp like I did in my last example. So now I have a bunch of little squares that you can see here with the white stamping embossed on it, and it's time to add some color to it. Here's my card panel. I'm covering it with some adhesive so that I can put my pieces there once I've inked them. So I decided again to use Distress ink to ink these with my ink blending tool, simply because that's a very fast method. But again, you could use pretty much any dye or pigment or watercolor inks for this. So that was my bottom right corner piece, so I'm gluing it right on to that card panel that's ready to go. So I'm starting on the bottom and working my way up to color all of the pieces, and I'm kind of doing a random rainbow order. All of the pieces will fit together like a puzzle since we cut them apart from each other. Now you could save a lot of time by not cutting out as many squares from this background, but I timed it and this card took me just under an hour, which is pretty quick for me. Since the background is the focal point of the card, the other steps don't take long at all. So you can see I'm moving up to my next row, taking the square, inking it, and then popping it in place. And I have this puzzle that I'm creating there at the top. Now this is a flat image. There were many ways I could have gotten the same look from a flat image. I could have done masking with the inking, but I want to pop up some of these squares so I have that fun dimension to my background stamp. So even though these are all glued here, I used an adhesive that will let me remove some of them. But first I decided to spray it with some Shimmer Spritz just to give it a bit of shine. This is gorgeous in real life. It has the most beautiful sparkle. I decided to do it at this point since all the pieces were kind of connected together, and I heat set it so it was dry. Now I'm going to carefully remove some of the pieces, kind of every other one, and put craft foam behind them. Now you could use foam squares or foam tape, but I wanted to have like a solid piece of dimension behind it so that it doesn't get crushed in the mail. Also, this takes a lot less time than peeling the backing off of a bunch of little foam squares. So what I'm doing is using liquid adhesive to add a piece of craft foam to the back of each piece, and then the same liquid adhesive to adhere it back in place on the card. So here I'll do it again. Carefully remove the piece, add some liquid adhesive, put that onto a piece of craft foam. That's what this white piece is down here on the bottom. I'll use my scissors to cut around it. I cut kind of a little bit inside, not right up against the edge, but a little bit smaller than the stamped piece. Now I can use some liquid adhesive on my card and pop that piece back in place. And this only took me about 10 minutes to do, and you can see the fun dimension that you have. Now for the sentiment, I combined the stamp set with the die cut word set you see behind it. This is the stamp set that I used earlier. It has lots of seasonal messages, and I like that you can build some very encouraging sentiments, like summer is coming, sending some summer sunshine your way, lots of different things. And there are the 4 different season dies, and I used the summer. I stack 3 white summer die cuts with a black die cut on top, and I white heat embossed the word happy on a black cardstock strip. I also added a little gemstone to the connection of each of those little squares just for some little bit of interest. Here you can also see the fun sparkle that we get from that Shimmer Spritz. So there you have a couple ways to add dimension to your background stamps. It's really a fun way to get a new look. I hope you'll give it a try. It's definitely worth the effort. If you are interested in the supplies that I use, they're linked below in my YouTube description. In the middle here are a couple other videos that you might like, including a link to my blog where there's much more information. Thanks for spending some time with me today, and we'll see you again very soon.